Hello, and welcome back to this quiet journey through history, science. Here we take time to wander slowly into questions that have no need for quick answers. Tonight, we ask something that at first sounds almost impossible, but when we sit with it, becomes strangely reasonable. What if the very first cities on this planet were not built by humans at all? What if life had been gathering into patterns of permanence, complexity, and community long before we laid the first brick or shaped the first stone? When we think of the word city, a certain image comes to mind. Perhaps we picture tall walls rising around a settlement. We might imagine dusty streets lined with houses, marketplaces full of exchange, or temples towering above to watch over it all. The city is, for many, the hallmark of civilization itself. It is permanence against the wilderness. It is a marker that people were no longer wandering in small groups, but gathering into something greater, something stable, something enduring. The oldest names are whispered with reverence: Jericho, Karthaluk, Uruk, the Indus Valley cities. Here, we say, human beings began their great experiment with urban life. They farmed, they built walls, they organized in ways that still echo into our own time. But perhaps we should step back and reconsider, for the definition of a city is not limited to humans. Permanence, organization, networks of exchange, shelters arranged into systems. These are not ours alone. All around us, often beneath our feet or just beyond our notice, other creatures have been building cities of their own for millions of years. Ants carve sprawling labyrinths underground, some of them stretching for hundreds of meters, filled with chambers for nurseries, granaries, and farms. Termites construct mounds that rise like towers on the horizon, complete with natural ventilation systems more efficient than many modern designs. Beavers shape landscapes by felling trees, damming rivers, and creating wetlands that become habitats for countless species. Corals, though tiny and delicate in their individual forms, collaborate to build reefs that stretch for miles, cities beneath the waves, housing thousands of inhabitants and lasting sometimes for thousands of years. If permanence, community, and planning are part of the essence of a city, then perhaps humans were not the first. Perhaps we were simply the latest to follow a path that life itself has been walking for far longer than we tend to acknowledge. Consider for a moment how Jericho is often called the world's oldest city. Archaeologists tell us its walls date back at least 9,000 years. That is impressive when measured against the brief span of human history. But beside the mounds of Africa, where termites have been building for millions of years, Jericho seems new, almost a late arrival. Beside the coral reefs that began rising tens of millions of years ago, Jericho is a mere instant. This does not diminish the achievements of human cities. Rather, it places them in a broader story. It invites us to see urban life not as a uniquely human creation, but as part of a larger pattern in nature. Life gathers, it organizes, it builds, and sometimes it builds big. But before we travel further, let us pause and ask, what is it that makes a city truly? Is it simply the number of individuals clustered together? Is it the duration of its existence, measured in centuries or millennia? Is it the presence of streets, walls, or markets? Or is it something subtler, something about intention and identity? A human city carries within it not only the physical structures, but also symbolic meaning. A temple is not only stone, it is a statement, a gathering place, a link between earth and sky. A wall is not only protection, but also a message. Here we are, and here is where we remain. So then, Can a termite mound be called a city? Can a beaver colony or a coral reef? Some would say no, for they lack the symbolic. They are not inscribed with language or dedicated to deities. Yet look closer, and you see something remarkable. The termite mound regulates temperature, cycles air, protects the colony, and supports agriculture, for termites farm fungi inside those chambers. The beaver's dam creates an entire ecosystem, altering rivers in ways that sustain countless lives beyond its own. Coral reefs are not only structures, but entire worlds, designed in cooperation and symmetry, sheltering thousands of species in a harmony humans have rarely matched. In these structures, meaning exists too. Though it may not be spoken in words, the meaning is survival, it is resilience, it is the continuation of community across generations. These are their temples, their marketplaces, their walls. They may not write them into chronicles, but they live them into being. Imagine if long before the first human bricks were stacked into walls, a traveler could walk across the plains of Africa and see towers rising out of the ground, built by termites, taller than the tallest human of that era. Imagine if, long before Uruk was founded, reefs had already formed sprawling underwater labyrinths larger than any city humans would build for thousands of years. These were not curiosities, they were enduring, massive, complex societies. Not human, but societies nonetheless. So perhaps when we speak of the first cities, we are speaking from a narrow perspective. We are speaking only of ourselves, as though history begins with our walls and our streets. But the earth itself has hosted builders for much longer, builders without names, builders who will never appear in textbooks of ancient history, yet whose achievements still shape the landscapes we live in. There is something humbling in this, to recognize that what we call civilization may not be the first time complexity gathered into permanence, to recognize that we are not alone in the impulse to build, to organize, to endure. It is a reminder that intelligence wears many faces, and that survival itself is a form of art. The first human cities may have marked a turning point for us. But for the earth, cities were already old. The world had already been reshaped by beavers, by corals, by ants, by termites. Life had been gathering into complex structures long before we began our own. In this sense, our story is not a beginning, but a continuation, a new variation on a theme as ancient as life itself. And so, as we begin this meditation, let us carry that awareness, that when we walk through modern streets lined with skyscrapers, or when we study ruins from thousands of years ago, we are participating in a lineage far older than ourselves. A lineage of builders, a lineage of gatherers, a lineage of those who seek permanence against time, and who shape the environment not only to survive, but to thrive. As this episode unfolds, we will explore these ideas more deeply. We will look at what defines a city, how non-human architects fit into that definition, and what it means for our understanding of civilization itself. We will consider how traces survive in the record of geology and archaeology, and what lessons we might learn from comparing human cities with the enduring structures of other species. For now, it is enough to begin with this question. What if the first cities were never ours? What if we are simply part of a much larger tradition of life gathering, building, and enduring? The answer is not meant to diminish our role, but to expand our sense of wonder. Cities, in this light, are not only human creations, they are life's way of expressing complexity, resilience, and beauty. And in that sense, we walk not as the first, but as part of something timeless. Let us notice how oceans, skies, rocks, and air work together in patterns that are both intricate and resilient. Life is never content with scattering itself loosely. Again and again, it finds ways to concentrate, to cluster, to persist in forms that are greater than any single organism. When we describe cities as a human achievement, we are describing a pattern that has far older roots. For what is a city if not a gathering of many into a structure that supports survival and continuity? Archaeologists often describe cities as permanent, planned settlements with dense populations. They note the presence of public spaces, temples or religious centers, economic exchange, systems of governance, and often some form of record keeping. But strip these definitions down to their essence, and what remains is something simple. A city is where life clusters in durable form. It is where survival is no longer dependent on wandering or dispersing, but on organization, cooperation, and shared infrastructure. With that in mind, it becomes easier to see parallels beyond our species. Termites construct mounds that rise several meters above the ground, yet extend far deeper beneath the surface. Within these hidden chambers are nurseries for young, storage spaces for food, and carefully ventilated tunnels that regulate airflow. Temperatures remain stable inside even when the external climate swings wildly. The termites farm fungi to sustain their colony, a form of agriculture older than our own experiments with wheat or barley. In scale, duration, and function, these mounds are cities. They may not have temples in the sense we recognize, but they embody sacredness in another form. They are the living heart of a community, tended and expanded across generations. Ants push this analogy further still. Supercolonies of ants can stretch across hundreds of kilometers, each nest connected by paths of cooperation, their networks larger in territory than many ancient human kingdoms. Within these colonies are specialists, divisions of labor, defense systems, and agricultural practices, such as the tending of aphids for food. It is tempting to think of ants as simple creatures, yet in their collectives, they achieve complexity that rivals our own in scale, though expressed differently. Beavers, in contrast, work on the scale of landscapes. A single family can transform a river valley by felling trees and creating dams. Behind these dams, ponds form, wetlands expand. Other species arrive to thrive in the new ecosystem. Birds nest in the trees at the edges. Fish gather in the ponds. Amphibians multiply. The beaver-esque construction is not only for itself, but becomes a foundation for entire communities of life. In this way, the beaver colony functions as a city, just for beavers, but for a multitude of creatures, an ecological metropolis shaped by wood, water, and time. Corals represent yet another form. Individually small and fragile, together they create reefs that stretch for miles, rising from the seafloor like stone cities. These reefs provide shelter, food, and protection for countless species. They endure across centuries, sometimes millennia, growing slowly but persistently, generation after generation, adding to the structure. Coral reefs are not metaphorical cities. They are literal ones, submerged and ancient, with a diversity of inhabitants greater than many human settlements have ever known. When viewed this way, our assumption that humans were the first city builders seems less certain. Perhaps the distinction lies not in the act of building itself, but in the meaning we attach to it. Humans imbue cities with symbolism. Our streets are named, our walls inscribed, our temples built to connect us with gods or to record cosmic order. Our cities are mirrors of thought as much as they are instruments of survival, yet the line is not as sharp as it appears. Ants may not carve inscriptions, but their patterns are recorded in soil and scent. Beavers may not write, but their dams encode knowledge of river systems, timber strength, and water flow. Corals may not declare intent, yet their reefs embody design shaped by millions of years of adaptation. The question then deepens: does a city require writing to be a city? Does it require symbolic thought? Or is its essence in the way it brings life together into durable, organized form? If we accept the latter, then the first cities may not have been human. They may have been termite mounds rising on African plains long before hominids stood upright. They may have been coral reefs glowing beneath prehistoric seas, while dinosaurs still walked the land. In our own early human settlements, the resemblance is striking. Cthulhu, one of the oldest known human cities, had no streets as we would recognize them. Houses were clustered tightly together, their roofs functioning as pathways. Within, families organized their lives around hearths, ovens, and storage spaces. Burials occurred beneath the floors, binding the living and the dead together in enduring homes. The city was alive with memory and function, yet in its clustering, its shared infrastructure, its continuity across generations, it mirrors the patterns of termite mounds or ant colonies. The difference is not in form, but in the symbolic layers humans wove into it. Jericho, another ancient settlement, surrounded itself with walls. These walls were both practical and symbolic. They defended the community against floods and against outsiders, but they also declared presence. To build a wall is to say, here is a boundary, here is identity, here we endure. Termites build walls too, sealing their mounds against predators and weather. Beavers raise barriers against flowing water. Again, the similarity is plain. The difference lies in whether we recognize intention in terms of symbol, or whether we allow survival itself to carry meaning. Uruk, often called the first true city, offers yet another example. Within its walls rose temples dedicated to gods, ziggurats reaching skyward, and spaces for record-keeping where cuneiform tablets were pressed into clay. Here writing itself was born, or at least first flourished, tethering the city not only to survival but to memory. Uruk's scale and its innovations set it apart. Yet even here, if we peel back the symbolic, we see the same underlying forces: concentration of life, division of labor, construction of durable infrastructure, exchange of goods, preservation of knowledge. These are the qualities of cities, human or otherwise. To walk through these comparisons is to feel humility. Our accomplishments are profound, yet they are part of a longer continuity. We are not the only builders. We are not the first to gather into permanence. The earth has seen this pattern before, again and again, expressed in different forms. What is unique in us is not the impulse, but the particular ways we record and symbolize it. Our cities speak not only of survival, but of identity, of gods and governments, of memory written into stone and script. Yet even this may have parallels in forms we cannot yet perceive, in the quiet codes of scent, sound, or structure that other species use to mark their world. There is also the question of scale across time. Our cities rise and fall within centuries. Ruins of once great metropolises crumble in mere thousands of years. Yet termite mounds have dotted landscapes for millions. Coral reefs predate humanity itself by ages so vast that our history is but a breath against their persistence. If permanence is a measure of greatness, then perhaps our claim is smaller than we think. Our skyscrapers may rise higher, but will they endure as long as the mounds of termites or the reefs of coral? And so, the meditation deepens. Perhaps the city is not a human invention at all. Perhaps it is a pattern of life, recurring wherever cooperation, adaptation, and permanence align. Perhaps we are not originators, but participants in an ancient, ongoing process. Our walls and towers, our streets and temples, are our verse in a song that began long before us and may continue long after. To sit with this thought is to feel both humility and wonder. Humility, in recognizing that we are not as unique as we once thought. Wonder, in realizing that we are part of something larger, a story that stretches across species and eras. The first cities may not have been ours, and if so, then our own cities are not a break with nature, but a continuation of its deepest rhythms. When we turn to the archaeological record, the story of our cities begins to take shape. Stone by stone, layer by layer, we see how human beings moved from clusters of families to larger, more permanent settlements. Yet even here, the lines are not sharp. The transition from village to city is gradual, blurred by centuries of experimentation, failure, and adaptation. One of the most remarkable places to study this transition is Thought-provoking, located in present-day Turkey. Excavated over decades, it reveals a dense settlement more than 9,000 years old. Its houses were pressed tightly together, walls sharing walls, creating a kind of living honeycomb of human life. There were no streets in the sense we know them. Instead, people moved across rooftops, descending into their homes through openings in the ceilings. Within each home, hearths burned, ovens baked, and food was stored in alcoves. Burials were made beneath the floors, binding families to the very ground on which they lived. In this city, if we call it that, there were no monumental temples rising above the horizon. Yet in the interiors, walls were painted with images of bulls, hunters, and abstract designs. Skulls of animals were mounted, their horns emerging from plaster as though walls themselves breathed life. These decorations were not merely aesthetic. They encoded meaning, ritual, and memory. The home was not just shelter, but sanctuary. Survival here was bound together with symbols and practices that gave shape to life. When we look at Thought-provoking, it is tempting to compare it again to termite mounds or ant colonies. The density of homes resembles a mound's chambers. The shared pathways across roofs mirror the interconnected tunnels of insect societies. Yet here the human difference emerges: paint, symbol, ritual. The presence of art tells us that for these early people, living together required not only practical arrangements, but shared meaning. Their city was not only a system of survival, it was also a stage for memory and imagination. Jericho, another ancient settlement, tells yet another story. Situated near springs in the Jordan Valley, Jericho has been continuously inhabited for thousands of years. Its claim as one of the world's oldest cities rests partly on its walls. Around 8000 BCE, its inhabitants built a massive stone wall, thick and high, surrounding their community. At its base was a tower rising more than 30 feet, built from stone with remarkable skill. The wall was not merely defensive, it was also symbolic. To construct a boundary is to declare identity, to say, here is us, here is order, beyond lies the unknown. What is striking is how early this wall appeared. Long before Uruk or Babylon, Jericho declared its presence with stone. The tower suggests organization, shared labor, and a vision of collective life. Yet we must wonder, What drove people to gather here? Was it the reliable water from the springs? Was it the fertile soil of the valley? Or was it something deeper, an urge to cluster, to endure, to create permanence against the shifting uncertainties of time? In Mesopotamia, the pattern deepened. Uruk, often celebrated as the first true city, flourished around 4000 BCE. Here we see not only dense settlements and monumental architecture, but also writing. Clay tablets pressed with wedge-shaped cuneiform recorded transactions, offerings, and decrees. Temples rose above the plain, their stepped ziggurats reaching toward the heavens. Walls encircled the city, and trade networks extended outward across rivers and deserts. Uruk represents a threshold, with writing, memory extended beyond the frailty of speech. With temples, power and meaning were anchored in stone. With walls, the city was declared as both physical and symbolic entity. Here, urban life became more than survival. It became a stage for politics, economy, religion, and art, interwoven into a structure that endured beyond the lifespans of individuals. And yet, as we meditate on Uruk, we can still see the echoes of earlier patterns. Its walls resemble the dams of Beavers, protective barriers against outside forces. Its temples recall termite mounds, with their careful architecture designed to sustain life within. Its trade networks echo the branching paths of ants, linking distant nodes into one connected whole. The difference lies not in the pattern, but in the way humans imbued it with narrative, symbol, and identity. We might then ask, why do cities arise at all? Why not remain in small groups, dispersed across the land, as humans had done for tens of thousands of years? The answer lies partly in necessity. Agriculture encouraged settlement. To plant fields, tend crops, and store grain required staying in place. As surpluses grew, so did populations. Complexity demanded organization, and organization demanded structure. But beneath necessity, there is another layer. A city is not only about survival, it is about belonging. To live among others is to weave one's life into a larger whole. The city becomes an organism, each person a cell within it, contributing to its pulse and rhythm. The comparison with natural cities returns here. In a coral reef, each polyp contributes to a vast structure that shelters thousands of species. In an ant colony, each worker plays a role within a collective greater than itself. In a termite mound, the builders construct something no individual could achieve alone. Likewise, in Uruk, no single person could have built the walls, written the tablets, or raised the ziggurats. It was the collective effort that created permanence. When archaeologists uncover these ruins, they do more than measure stones or catalogue artifacts. They listen for patterns. They trace the echoes of lives lived together, of dreams and struggles embedded in clay. Each wall, each shard of pottery, each mark on a tablet is a whisper from the past, telling us not only how people survived, but how they imagine their world. Göbekli Tepe, older still, complicates the story. Located in southeastern Turkey, it dates to around 9500 BCE, predating agriculture itself. Here, massive stone pillars were erected in circular enclosures, carved with images of animals, birds, and abstract forms. There is little evidence of permanent habitation. No houses clustered tightly together, no granaries or storerooms. Yet the site suggests gatherings of people, collective labor, and ritual significance. Some archaeologists argue it was a ceremonial center, built by hunter-gatherers before the rise of cities. If so, Then symbolic gathering preceded economic necessity. People came together not only to survive, but to imagine, to create meaning in stone. This raises profound questions. If cities are defined by permanence, organization, and shared meaning, does Göbekli Tepe qualify as a proto-city? Its stones are monumental, its carvings intricate, its labor collective, yet it lacks the dense habitation we associate with urban life. Perhaps it shows us that the impulse to gather, to build, to symbolize, existed long before agriculture anchored people in place. Perhaps the first cities were not about survival at all, but about story, about myth, about reaching for something beyond the immediate needs of life. From Kotolyuk to Jericho, from Uruk to Göbekli Tepe, the pattern unfolds. Human beings built spaces that endured, spaces that held both bodies and memories. Yet as we have seen, this impulse is not uniquely human. It resonates with termites, ants, beavers, and corals. The continuity is striking. Life seeks to cluster. Life builds. Life creates permanence. And so, the boundary between human and non-human cities grows porous. If termites can build mounds with ventilation systems, if ants can establish super colonies stretching 4 miles, if corals can construct reefs visible from space, then perhaps the essence of the city is not human invention, but life's broader tendency toward complexity. What distinguishes us is not the act of building, but the symbols, stories, and memories we embed within our walls. This reflection invites us to look at our modern cities differently. The skyscrapers of New York or Shanghai, the dense streets of Tokyo, the historic quarters of Cairo or Athens, all are continuations of a pattern that stretches back through millennia and beyond species. Our towers may be taller, our networks more digital, but the impulse is ancient: to gather, to organize, to endure. If the first cities were not human, then our cities are not an exception, but a continuation. We are participants in a much older rhythm, one that has shaped the earth for millions of years. And as we walk through our streets, lit by electric lights and crossed by digital signals, we might pause to imagine termite mounds rising on African plains, beaver dams reshaping rivers, coral reefs glowing in the ocean depths. In them, we see not only parallels but kinship. We are not alone in our building. We are part of a continuum of life that clusters, adapts, and endures. If we linger on the thought that cities might not be a uniquely human invention, we begin to see that what we call civilization is part of a much longer conversation between life and its environment. The great termite mounds in Africa rise taller than a person. Their inner chambers regulate temperature and moisture with astonishing precision. They have been compared to living lungs, inhaling and exhaling with the rhythm of the day. Ant colonies stretch 4 miles, united by chemical trails invisible to the eye but tangible to the senses of the colony itself. Coral reefs expand slowly across centuries, layering skeleton upon skeleton until whole coastlines transform. Human cities are more visible, more dramatic in their changes, but perhaps not so different in essence. They too alter landscapes, drawing resources inward, pushing waste outward, weaving individuals into something greater than themselves. What makes us pause is not that humans build, but that we attach memory, myth, and story to our building. A termite mound is impressive, but it does not tell stories of its ancestors. A coral reef is vast, but it does not carve into stone the image of its own creation. Humans write, paint, carve, and pass forward the tales of how their cities came to be. Consider Sumerian myths, among the oldest we know. The Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of Uruk, its great walls, its people, its struggles, and its kings. It does not simply describe a place. It transforms the city into a stage for human longing, friendship, and grief. The city itself becomes a character, immortalized in words long after its walls crumbled. This is one way humans differ. We bind our physical cities to stories, and those stories endure even when stone does not, yet memory is fragile. Many early cities are gone, their names forgotten, their shapes blurred by soil and time. Sometimes all that remains is a faint outline in the earth, a discoloration visible only from the air, or a scattering of pottery fragments that once held grain, water, or oil. Archaeologists kneel over these fragments with brushes, reconstructing lives from shards. What is remarkable is not just how much has been lost, but how much has survived. The earth buries, but it also preserves. Fire hardens clay, ash blankets ruins, sand entombs walls. The planet does not keep everything, but it holds on to enough for us to sense what came before. When we reflect on lost cities, we must also consider the cities we have not yet found. Across deserts, jungles, and tundra, countless sites remain undiscovered. In the Amazon, aerial surveys reveal faint geometric earthworks beneath the canopy, hints of settlements erased by centuries of regrowth. In Central Asia, sands conceal traces of towns once active along the Silk Road. In the deep waters of continental shelves, where sea levels were lower in the past, drowned landscapes await exploration. How many stories remain submerged, silent, or hidden just below the surface? How many cities lie forgotten, their builders long vanished, their stones indistinguishable from nature? This question leads us to consider what defines a city. Is it sheer size, monumentality, writing, trade, or is it something subtler, like the concentration of lives, the organization of space, the persistence of community across generations? If the latter, then perhaps many places we overlook were once cities of their own kind. Small, impermanent, perhaps, but dense with meaning to those who lived there. For them, a cluster of homes by a riverbank may have felt as permanent and important as Uruk felt to its inhabitants. When we look at modern maps of ancient cities, it is tempting to see them as fixed points. Uruk here, Jericho there, Kutuluk over in Anatolia. But cities were not static. They shifted, grew, shrank, and sometimes moved entirely. A river might change its course, forcing people to rebuild elsewhere. A climate shift might turn fertile soil into barren dust, leaving walls abandoned. Trade routes might shift, drawing energy to new centers. A city was less a fixed object and more a living rhythm, waxing and waning with the forces around it. This rhythm, again, echoes what we see in nature. Ant colonies rise and fall, abandoning old sites and establishing new ones. Coral reefs grow and die back, sometimes bleaching under stress, sometimes flourishing again when conditions allow. Beavers may leave one dam and construct another downstream. Life builds, abandons, and rebuilds. Cities follow the same pulse, though at a scale that feels vast to us, but is still fleeting in geological time. There is also the question of memory within these rhythms. Termite mounds do not remember their predecessors. Ants do not pass down stories of older tunnels, but humans do, or at least, we try. Ancient myths often encode faint memories of real places, disasters, or migrations. Flood stories echo across cultures, perhaps recalling the rising seas at the end of the last ice age. Legends of great walls or towers might trace back to the first monumental buildings humans raised. Even when distorted by time and retelling, These stories preserve fragments of ancient experience. It is possible that some of the earliest cities lived on, not in stone, but in story. Oral traditions might carry echoes of places now buried or forgotten. We cannot always distinguish story from history, but sometimes they are two sides of the same coin. The myth of Atlantis, for example, might not describe a literal city swallowed by the sea, but it could reflect collective memories of coastal flooding or lost communities. Similarly, tales of golden ages, lost kingdoms, or vanished peoples may hold kernels of truth about forgotten settlements. When we look at the ruins of ancient cities today, it is easy to focus on what remains: the stone walls, the pottery, the carvings. But what is missing is just as important. Wood decays, textiles rot, metals corrode. The sounds of voices, the smell of fires, the rhythms of songs are gone. What we have is skeletal. The living city is lost, and only the bones remain. To reconstruct the life that once animated those stones requires imagination, patience, and humility. Archaeologists can estimate population sizes, diets, and trade networks, but the daily feel of life, the laughter, the disputes, the silences is forever out of reach. And yet, in contemplating these absences, we are drawn deeper into the mystery. It is here that the subtle question of non-human builders arises again. If life tends toward clustering, building, and enduring, then what if some of the earliest patterns of city-like structures were not ours? Could there have been settlements or communal spaces made by other species long before ours? Not intelligent in the sense we think of civilization, but collective, organized, enduring. Coral reefs are one possibility, though not terrestrial. But on land, could there have been other early builders whose traces we no longer recognize? This is not to suggest mythical lost races, rather, it is a reflection on continuity. Just as cities blur into villages, villages into camps, so to do human patterns blur into those of other species. Perhaps our first cities were less an invention than an extension, a carrying forward of rhythms that life had already been practicing for millions of years. Modern cities amplify this continuity in ways we may not fully see. Satellite images of Earth at night reveal glowing constellations of light, spreading across continents. These resemble neural networks, branching rivers, or fungal mycelium beneath the soil. Patterns repeat at different scales, suggesting that the impulse to connect, to cluster, to spread is a universal one. In this light, the first cities are not isolated miracles, but inevitable expressions of a deeper order. What then does it mean to ask if the first cities were never built by humans? Perhaps it means recognizing that we are part of a lineage of builders far older than our species. Our walls and streets echo the tunnels of ants. Our temples echo the mounds of termites. Our networks echo the webs of mycelium and rivers. The difference lies not in the act of building, but in the stories we tell about it. By binding memory to stone, by carving meaning into walls, we turn structures into symbols. And in doing so, we give our cities a kind of immortality, at least for as long as the stones last. The fragility of this immortality must be acknowledged. Cities rise and fall. Some last centuries, others millennia, but none are eternal. Earth itself is an efficient recycler. Mountains erode, rivers shift, tectonic plates move. What is built is eventually unbuilt, and so the story of cities is also the story of impermanence. This truth humbles us, even as we marvel at the entrance of ruins. In the ruins, silence reigns. The walls no longer echo with footsteps. The streets no longer bustle with trade, yet in the silence, there is presence. A broken column, a half-buried wall, a faint outline in the soil. These whisper to us that life once gathered here, that people dreamed, built, struggled, and endured, that the pattern of clustering, of building, of belonging is ancient, and we are but its current stewards. When we ask what remains of the first cities, we must also consider what does not. For every wall that endures, countless others have crumbled into soil. For every part that survives in a museum, thousands more lie shattered, their fragments ground into dust by wind and rain. Wood rots, cloth decays, metals corrode, and even stone weathers slowly back into sand. The record of the past is not a complete story, but a collection of fragments. To hold one shard of pottery in the hand is to touch both presence and absence. It is a fragment of a meal long eaten, a fragment of a life long vanished. This fragility is humbling. It tells us that the earth is not a careful archivist. It does not preserve equally. It erases as much as it remembers. Fires consume, floods wash away, earthquakes topple, and shifting soils bury. The ruins that survive are accidents of preservation, scattered notes in a vast symphony that has mostly gone unheard. And yet, from these fragments, we attempt to reconstruct not only how people lived, but how they dreamed. Sometimes we succeed in surprising ways. In the ruins of Mesopotamian cities, small clay tablets have been found inscribed with cuneiform. At first, they recorded simple transactions, grain owed, animals traded, labor performed. But gradually, they expanded. Stories were written down, laws codified, prayers and incantations preserved. These tablets endured not because they were meant to, but because clay, once fired, becomes stone-like, fragile in a hand, yet enduring across millennia when buried in the earth. Today, when we read them, we do not just glimpse the mechanics of ancient economies. We overhear voices speaking across thousands of years. Other times, the record is less clear. Consider the Indus Valley civilization, with its great cities at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Here, streets were laid out in grids, drainage systems carried waste away, and standardized weights and measures suggest complex trade. Yet their writing, etched into seals and pottery, remains undeciphered. We see the order of their cities, but not the stories they told. Their voices are silent, their meanings hidden. To walk among their ruins is to sense intelligence and organization, but without the words, we are left with mystery. This silence is a reminder that cities are more than physical spaces. They are also conversations, stories, agreements, and memories. Without those voices, the stones alone cannot fully speak. Yet even silence can be instructive. It teaches us the limits of knowledge, the boundaries of interpretation, and the persistence of mystery. The Indus Valley cities remind us that even when the stones endure, meaning can still be lost. We might pause here and think about the other silences, the countless cities never found, their stones repurposed, their names forgotten, their traces dissolved into soil. For every Uruk, Jericho, or Mohenjo-Daro, there may have been others that vanished entirely. Perhaps built of wood, they left no enduring monuments. Perhaps located in floodplains, they were washed away. Perhaps they were small, their scale unremarkable to later eyes. Yet for those who lived in them, they were worlds complete. This realization broadens our perspective. When we think of the first cities, we often imagine monumental ruins that still impress us today. But to those who lived in the deep past, a city may have meant something more modest. A cluster of homes around a hearth, a gathering place near a river, a settlement that endured 4 generations. If permanence and density define a city, then perhaps the world has seen more of them than we know, most now lost to time. This also shifts how we think about origins. Cities may not have sprung suddenly from invention, but may have emerged gradually, from small clusters to larger ones, from temporary gatherings to permanent dwellings. They may have existed in forms we would not immediately recognize: seasonal camps, ritual sites, or trading hubs. Over time, some of these expanded, solidified, and endured long enough to leave traces we still find today. Others faded without a sound. There is something profoundly human in this gradual emergence. Just as a tree grows ring by ring, invisible until cut open, so too does urban life grow layer by layer. We do not notice this shift in the moment. It is only later, when centuries have passed, that we can see the transformation. For those living within it, the first cities may not have felt new or radical. They may have felt like natural extensions of what had always been: gathering, building, sharing. The difference was one of scale and permanence. This is why the comparison to natural builders continues to resonate. Ants do not wake one day and decide to create a colony. It grows naturally from their behavior, small clusters becoming networks, networks becoming vast societies. Termites do not set out to build mounds as monuments. Their actions accumulate into structures beyond the capacity of individuals. Likewise, humans, guided by need, habit, and imagination, created cities not by sudden invention, but by gradual growth. As we meditate on these patterns, we are reminded that permanence is relative. To us, a city that endures 1,000 years feels eternal. To the earth, it is a brief spark. Uruk flourished for centuries, but its ruins are now silent. The Indus Valley cities thrived, then declined, their language lost. Even Rome, once the center of a vast empire, saw its population dwindle. Its monuments reused for other purposes. Its glory dimmed before later generations rebuilt anew. Permanence is always provisional, and yet, the memory of cities lingers. Not always in stone, but in story, legends of golden ages, tales of lost kingdoms, myths of vanished peoples. They may not describe specific places, but they preserve the sense that cities have always been fragile, always vulnerable to time. These stories are another kind of ruin, one made of words rather than stone. They remind us that memory can endure even when walls do not. It is in this intersection of stone and story, ruin and memory, that we find the subtle mystery of the first cities. They are both familiar and strange, both continuous with what came before and radically new. They are built by human hands, yet they echo patterns found in non-human builders. They endure, yet they vanish. They are remembered, yet they are forgotten. To walk among their remains is to stand at the boundary between presence and absence, knowledge and mystery. When we look at our own cities today, stretching across landscapes with lights, towers, and networks of steel and glass, we might pause to imagine how they will appear to future eyes. Which fragments will endure? Which stories will survive? Will archaeologists of a distant age find shards of glass, concrete foundations, and metal remnants, puzzling over their meanings as we puzzle over clay tablets and broken walls? Will our voices be preserved in records, or will they be lost like the undeciphered scripts of the Indus Valley? This thought invites humility. We are not outside the cycle. Our cities too are provisional, subject to erosion, disaster, and forgetting. To live in a city now is to participate in a rhythm older than humanity itself. It is to walk paths that echo the tunnels of ants, the channels of rivers, the branches of trees. It is to build within a pattern that life has always followed, to cluster, to connect, to endure for a while, and then to yield to time. Perhaps, then, the first cities were never truly ours. They belong to life itself, to the broader impulse of Earth to gather and build. We are part of that story, not its beginning and not its end. To recognize this is not to diminish our achievements, but to place them within a larger frame, one that stretches beyond species and epochs. And so we return to the thought, what if the first cities were never built by humans? Perhaps the question is not about who built them, but about what building means. To build is to express life's longing for continuity. To build is to create spaces where individuals can become part of something greater. To build is to resist impermanence, if only for a time. Whether in stone, wood, or coral, whether in human hands or insect mandibles, the act is the same. To build is to remember, even if memory itself will one day fade. If we look closely at the ruins of early cities, we find not only remnants of walls and streets, but echoes of belonging. For those who lived within them, cities were not abstractions. They were lived experiences, places where memory and daily life intertwined. To gather in a marketplace, to share food near a hearth, to listen to a story told at dusk, these were not mere activities. They were threads woven into a fabric of community. Belonging is not always visible in stone, yet it is often the most enduring part of what a city means. The walls crumble, but the idea of gathering together persists. We can feel it even now when we walk through a crowded square or hear the sounds of voices overlapping in a cafe. The impulse to connect, to find others, to build shared worlds, is not an invention of modern times. It reaches deep into the past, as old as fire circles, as old as shelters leaning against one another in the wind. The first cities amplified this impulse, where once a handful of families gathered, now hundreds or thousands could coexist. This scale created both possibilities and challenges. It allowed for division of labor, specialization, and collective projects greater than any one family could achieve. It also introduced tensions, questions of fairness, of hierarchy, of power. In the fragments of ancient laws and records, we glimpse these negotiations. Rules about trade, about marriage, about property. Regulations meant to organize what had grown beyond simple familiarity. It is tempting to imagine that the first cities were harmonious utopias, places of equality and shared purpose. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Hierarchies emerged. Leaders, whether priests, chiefs, or kings, held authority. Inequalities became visible in houses of different sizes, in graves with richer or poorer offerings. Yet alongside these disparities, there is also evidence of collective spirit. Streets were planned, drains were dug, granaries were maintained. These were not the works of solitary rulers, but of communities cooperating. The paradox of cities is this: they embody both cooperation and conflict. They are places where people come together to share resources, but also places where disputes arise about how those resources are distributed. They magnify both the generosity and the ambitions of their inhabitants. To walk through an early city was to see this tension made visible. Temples rising beside modest homes, storage jars filled with surplus grain, while others worried about scarcity. The push and pull of human desire and need etched into stone. This complexity might make us wonder whether cities were natural at all. Perhaps they were departures from an older rhythm, a turning away from simpler, more balanced ways of life. Yet even here, The line is not clear. Villages, camps, and extended families carried their own forms of hierarchy and dispute. Cities only scaled them up. What changed was not the existence of conflict or cooperation, but the intensity of both. To gather more people in one place was to amplify what was already there. And so we arrive at a subtle truth. The first cities were not inventions imposed upon humanity from outside. They were magnifications of tendencies already present: the impulse to gather, the urge to share, the temptation to accumulate, the need to regulate. These did not begin in Uruk or Harappa. They were already embedded in the small clusters of families long before. The city only made them more visible, more lasting, and more intricate. In this way, cities mirror natural systems. A river is not created by a single drop of water. It is formed when countless drops follow the same path, flowing together, reinforcing one another until a channel is carved. The first cities followed a similar pattern. Individual actions, repeated, created habits. Habits, scaled, created systems. Systems, endured, created structures. And eventually, those structures became recognizable as something new: urban life. We might think of termites again. Their mounds are not designed by a single mind. They emerge from countless simple actions, repeated over and over. Each termite follows basic instincts, and yet together they build vast chambers, ventilation systems, and nurseries. Similarly, humans following daily needs, gathering food, seeking shelter, trading goods, caring for children, created patterns that accumulated into cities. No single person may have imagined the whole, yet the whole emerged nonetheless. If the first cities were never entirely ours, then it is because they were larger than individual intention. They were collective expressions, arising from countless hands and countless moments. Unlike natural systems, they contained within them the seeds of both flourishing and decline. For just as rivers flood and termite mounds collapse, so too do cities rise and fall. This cycle of rising and falling is not a tragedy alone. It is also part of the rhythm of life. Consider the ruins of Kotolyuk, one of the oldest known cities. It grew and thrived for centuries, then declined. Houses were abandoned, walls crumbled, and the settlement was eventually buried. But its decline did not mean failure. It was part of a larger cycle, part of the way human groups moved, adapted, and transformed. Cities end, but life continues, carrying lessons forward into new forms. The same can be said of great urban centers like the Indus Valley cities. Their decline was not simply disappearance, but transformation. People did not vanish, they shifted, they dispersed. They carried skills and memories with them, planting seeds for future growth in other places. In this sense, every city is both an ending and a beginning. Its fall scatters fragments that enrich the soil of future communities. When we meditate on this rhythm, a calm perspective emerges. Cities are not monuments to permanence, but expressions of impermanence. They are attempts to hold time still, to create stability, yet they are always provisional. They are both fragile and resilient, enduring for centuries, but always vulnerable to change. This is not a flaw but a truth of existence. To build is to create something that will one day fall. To live is to inhabit both presence and absence. If we carry this perspective into the present, our own cities appear differently. Their towers of glass and steel may seem indestructible, yet they too are subject to time. Concrete will crack, metals will rust, roads will erode, and long after we are gone, fragments of our urban lives will remain, to be puzzled over by future eyes. In this way, we are not apart from the story of the first cities, we are its continuation. We can imagine future archaeologists walking through the remnants of our cities. They may find plastic fragments hardened into strange fossils. They may uncover the ruins of skyscrapers, toppled and buried under sediment. They may wonder at the complexity of our networks, the density of our settlements, the traces of our global connections. And just as we wonder about the Indus Valley script, they may puzzle over aspects of our records, deciphering some while others remain obscure. This thought invites us to see ourselves as both builders and participants in a cycle far larger than ourselves. We are inheritors of patterns older than humanity, participants in rhythms that reach across species and epochs. To build is not uniquely ours. It is life's expression, unfolding in different forms across time. What is ours is the awareness of it, the ability to reflect, to wonder, to imagine the meaning of what we build. Perhaps this awareness is the true distinction of human cities. Not their scale, not their permanence, but their self-reflection. We not only build, but also ask why we build. We not only gather, but also question what gathering means. We not only leave ruins, but also meditate on their significance. This reflective layer may be our unique contribution to the long story of life's building impulse. It allows us to see the continuity and the mystery, to sense both the fragility and the wonder of what we create. And so the question remains open. What if the first cities were never built by humans? Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing that cities are not possessions, but processes. They are not objects we own, but rhythms we participate in. To say that they are ours alone is to narrow the frame. To see them as part of a larger pattern is to widen it. In that widening, humility arises, gratitude arises, a quiet sense that we are part of something vast, intricate, and mysterious. In the stillness of this thought, we might imagine an ancient city at dusk. The sun sets, casting long shadows over mud brick walls. Smoke rises from cooking fires, voices carry across courtyards. Children laugh, animals stir, elders speak softly, the city breathes. And those centuries will pass, though the walls will crumble and the voices will fade, the impulse that built it remains alive. It flows through time, through us, and into whatever comes next. If we pause to reflect on what cities do beyond providing shelter and food, we begin to notice that they shape imagination itself. A city is not just a collection of houses or a marketplace. It is also a stage for ideas. Within its walls, beliefs expand, stories circulate, symbols are created, and visions of the cosmos are given form. Where once people looked at the stars and told stories around a fire, cities provided temples, observatories, and spaces where those same stories could be carved into stone, painted on walls. To walk through one of the world's first cities was to move through a landscape of symbols. In Uruk, clay tablets recorded not only accounts of trade, but myths of gods and heroes. In the Indus Valley, undeciphered signs may have carried meanings we can only guess at, perhaps naming deities, perhaps marking rituals. In Mesoamerica, later cities align their pyramids with the rising of Venus or the cycles of the sun. Cities became mirrors of the heavens, grounding celestial order in earthly structures. This is one of the most profound roles of a city, to anchor the invisible in the visible. Cosmologies that might have once been whispered or sung became carved in reliefs, laid out in urban plans, enacted in rituals attended by thousands. A ziggurat rising over Mesopotamian streets was not merely a building. It was a representation of the cosmos itself, a ladder between earth and sky. The avenues of Teotihuacan were not random streets, but alignments with stars, channels through which heaven touched the ground. When we ask whether the first cities were truly human creations, it is worth considering how closely they mirrored patterns found in nature. The spirals of shells, the branching of trees, the courses of rivers. Many ancient urban plans borrowed these motifs, whether consciously or unconsciously. Circular enclosures echoed the sun and the moon. Axis lines mirrored the poles of the earth. In this sense, cities were not arbitrary, but attempts to embody patterns already present in the natural world. They extended the order of nature into the order of culture. If termites build mounds with ventilation systems that resemble lungs, and if bees construct hexagonal hives with remarkable efficiency, then perhaps our cities too are reflections of principles that life itself tends to follow. Patterns of circulation, concentration, and orientation repeat across scales. Just as rivers collect tributaries into a larger flow, cities collect paths of trade, kinship, and belief into larger currents. The same impulse that draws water downhill, birds into murmuration, may he also draw people together in shared space. But humans added something else: reflection. The first cities were not only built, but also explained. Myths justified them, rituals sanctified them, calendars regulated them. Unlike a termite mound, which simply exists, a city is wrapped in stories about why it exists. And those stories mattered deeply. They told people who they were, what they owed to one another, what they owed to gods or ancestors. The city became a living narrative, as much a story as a structure. Consider the example of Babylon. Its walls and gates were impressive, but what gave them power was the story that they were built under divine protection, that the city was the dwelling place of gods. Or think of Mohenjo-Daro. Its great bath may have been less about cleanliness and more about ritual purification, a symbolic act repeated by thousands that reinforced identity and meaning. In each case, the city was not only a set of bricks, but also a theatre of significance. This intertwining of structure and story suggests that cities were not merely functional, they were also aspirational. They reflected humanity's desire not only to survive, but to belong to a greater order. To live in a city was to live within a narrative larger than oneself. The streets were paths not only for trade but for meaning. The walls enclosed not only houses, but also collective identity. Here, the question of non-human origins gains another dimension. What if the first cities were shaped not only by human needs, but also by something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of life, the tendency to organize, to pattern, to symbolize? These tendencies are not unique to us. Birds weave nests with aesthetic flair. Bowerbirds decorate with symmetry and color. Whales sing songs that echo across oceans, shaping collective behavior. Life tends to reach toward order and beauty as well as survival. Perhaps our cities are simply one expression of this larger impulse. If so, then the first cities were not human in the narrow sense. They were human in collaboration with life itself. We did not invent the desire to organize space. We gave it a new form, but the impulse was already alive in the world. To see cities this way is to soften the boundary between humanity and nature. It is to recognize that our greatest constructions are continuations, not departures. This perspective invites us to revisit the ruins with gentler eyes. A broken ziggurat, a collapsed wall, an abandoned avenue, these are not only testimonies of human ambition, but also expressions of life's larger pattern of rise and fall. They remind us that we are not separate from nature, but woven into its cycles. Our cities are like coral reefs, complex, beautiful, fragile, and temporary. They grow, flourish, and eventually decline, feeding new growth elsewhere. And yet within their temporary span, cities shaped imagination in lasting ways. Writing systems developed in their streets. Measurements of time and space were refined in their observatories. Laws were codified, myths recorded, art created. The very concepts of order and governance, of divinity and society, were crystallized within their walls. Even when those walls fell, the ideas they sheltered continued to ripple outward. Today, when we speak of civilization, we often mean the city. Our languages, our institutions, our sciences all trace roots back to urban centers. This heritage is so profound that it is easy to forget that for most of human history, people lived without cities. Villages, camps, and mobile bands were the norm. The city was an experiment, an innovation, a radical reconfiguration. That it succeeded and spread suggests it tapped into something deep, something resonant not only with human desire, but with the rhythms of life itself. This reflection may help us understand our own ambivalence towards cities. We both love and fear them. They inspire awe with their scale and possibility, but they also exhaust with their density and demands. They offer culture, opportunity, and connection, but they also bring noise, inequality, and anonymity. This ambivalence is not new. It is woven into the very fabric of urban life. To live in a city has always meant to balance between gift and burden, between wonder and weight. In this balance, imagination thrives. Cities force people to ask questions. How do we live together? What rules are fair? What meaning binds us? What do we owe to one another? These questions, repeated across generations, gave rise to philosophy, law, art, and science. It is no coincidence that many of the world's great intellectual traditions emerged in cities. The density of life demanded reflection, and reflection, once begun, could not be easily stopped. If the first cities were never built by humans alone, then perhaps their greatest gift was not their walls or markets, but their questions. They awakened in us the capacity to reflect not only on what we are, but on what we might become. They showed us that life could be organized in ways that extended beyond family and clan, that meaning could be sought in collective endeavors, that the cosmos itself could be mirrored in brick and stone. We may walk today through ruins that seem silent, but listen closely, and the silence speaks. It tells of prayers whispered in temples, of debates held in marketplaces, of children playing in narrow alleys, of builders lifting stones under the sun. It tells of humans dreaming not only of survival, but of order, of beauty, of belonging to something greater. In those dreams, we glimpse not only the origins of cities, but the essence of what it means to be human. And so the meditation continues. What if the first cities were never built by humans? Perhaps they were built by life itself, with humans as one of many instruments. Perhaps they were not destinations, but passages, bridges between earth and sky, between instinct and imagination. To walk among their remains is to walk among echoes of a conversation older than history, a conversation that continues still in the streets we cross, in the walls we build, in the questions we ask when night falls over the city lights. One of the quiet revolutions that cities made possible was the transformation of memory. For countless generations before, memory was carried in stories spoken by elders, in songs repeated around fires, in gestures, dances, and rituals. Knowledge traveled through the fragile vessel of living memory, passed from one voice to another, always vulnerable to forgetting. The arrival of cities changed this. With clay tablets, with carvings, with painted walls, memory could be given a more durable home. This shift was profound. To write down a record of grain distributed, to inscribe a myth upon a tablet, to mark the seasons with a carved calendar, these were not only acts of preservation, they were acts of transformation. Knowledge could now outlast individual lives. It could be stored, retrieved, compared, and refined. A city became, in this sense, a kind of external brain, holding not only people, but the accumulated memory of a community. Consider the thousands of clay tablets unearthed from Mesopotamian cities. Many are mundane lists of goods, tallies of debts, inventories of livestock. Yet even in their mundanity, they reveal something extraordinary. Here were people learning to anchor memory outside themselves, to stabilize the fleeting flow of life. Beside these lists are also hymns, myths, epics. The same clay that recorded the price of barley also recorded the story of Gilgamesh. In these layered records, we see the birth of both bureaucracy and literature, both counting and dreaming. The city as a memory system did not rely only on writing. Its very structures encoded knowledge. Streets aligned to cardinal directions taught orientation. Temples measured the heavens with their shadows. Markets embodied systems of exchange and trust. Each element of urban design carried information about how to live, how to relate, how to imagine the world. To dwell in a city was to live inside a library, even if most of its books were unwritten. This expansion of memory changed the relationship between past, present, and future. Before, the horizon of knowledge was short. What one generation remembered could easily vanish with the next. In cities, knowledge could accumulate. Laws, techniques, myths, and histories could be preserved. This accumulation allowed for progress, for the refinement of crafts, the extension of traditions, the growth of collective identity. At the same time, it created a sense of being bound by the past, of inheriting obligations and records that could not be easily set aside. The dual nature of memory is still with us. It is both a gift and a burden. It allows us to build upon what came before, but it also ties us to the weight of continuity. Ancient cities knew this. They were not only places of innovation, but also places of tradition, where rituals were repeated, where stories were retold, where the past was honored. Inscriptions and monuments reminded inhabitants not only of what they might achieve, but also of what they owed to ancestors and gods. If cities were never fully human inventions, then perhaps memory itself was not ours alone. We see hints of it in other creatures. Elephants pass routes and watering places across generations. Birds remember migratory paths. Bees communicate directions to flowers through dances. Life carries memory in many forms: genetic, behavioral, ecological. What cities added was a new scale, a new vessel for memory that outlived individuals and even generations. In this sense, cities joined the long lineage of memory keepers, but they amplified it to unprecedented heights. This amplification carried risks. What is preserved may also be distorted. A king might inscribe victories, but omit defeats. A scribe might record debts, but not acts of generosity. Memory in stone and clay is not neutral. It reflects choices, perspectives, intentions. Thus, the first cities not only preserved knowledge, but also began shaping history, selecting what would be remembered and what would be forgotten. This act of selection gave immense power to those who controlled the means of inscription. We see this tension clearly in ruins. In Mesopotamia, we find praise of rulers carved deeply into stone, while the voices of common people are largely absent. In Egypt, pharaohs proclaimed their divinity in monuments, while the daily lives of farmers appear mostly in fragments. In the Indus Valley, undeciphered symbols may conceal voices we cannot yet hear. The city's memory, like all memory, is incomplete. It preserves and erases at once. This incompleteness is itself a lesson. To walk among ruins is to feel both the presence of the past and its absences. We know some names, but not most. We can reconstruct some rituals, but not all. The city offers us memory, but memory filtered, fractured, partial. In this way, ancient cities mirror our own experience of remembering. We never recall everything. We remember in fragments, guided by emotion, by importance, by chance. The ruins are the planet's version of this selective memory. And yet even fragments can be powerful. A shard of pottery tells of craft. A single inscription reveals a law. A collapsed wall marks a boundary. From pieces, we reconstruct wholes. From silence, we imagine voices. In this interplay of presence and absence, cities continue to speak long after their inhabitants are gone. They are like dreams that linger after waking, broken images, fleeting sounds, but carrying meaning nonetheless. The metaphor of dreams is apt, for cities are dreamscapes made solid. They are collective imaginings given material form. To build a city is to dream of permanence, of order, of belonging. To walk through its streets is to inhabit not only a place, but a vision of what life can be. This vision is never entirely stable. It shifts, it fades, it crumbles. But for a time, it shapes the lives of all who dwell within it. Perhaps this is why ruins evoke such deep feelings in us. They are not only reminders of the past, but mirrors of our own impermanence. To see the broken columns of a Greek temple or the crumbling walls of Mohenjo-Daro is to see time made visible. It is to recognize that our own cities, too, will one day be ruins. And yet there is beauty in this recognition. The ruins do not only speak of loss, they also testify to creativity, to resilience, to the human impulse to gather, build, and remember. If the first cities were never entirely ours, then their ruins are not only records of human ambition, but also records of life's greater rhythm. The soil that covers them nourishes plants. The stones that once formed walls shelter lizards. The rivers that once fed them flow still, carrying water to other places. In this way, the memory of a city is never entirely gone. It becomes part of the wider memory of the earth, recycled into new forms, new lives, new possibilities. We can imagine, then, that the earth itself remembers, not in words or inscriptions, but in cycles. The layers of sediment, the patterns of erosion, the distribution of fossils and artifacts, all are records, written not in language but in matter. Cities enter this record when they fall. Their bricks and shards become part of the geological story, folded into the Earth's layers, waiting for someone to uncover them millennia later. To meditate on this is to feel humility. Our greatest structures, our tallest towers, our most intricate systems all will eventually be absorbed into the same cycles. But this is not erasure alone, it is transformation. Just as ancient cities fed the soil of future societies, so will ours. Memory, like life, does not end, it changes form. And so we come to a quiet realization. The first cities were never only about humans gathering, they were about memory gathering. They were vessels for continuity, bridges across generations, mirrors of both presence and absence. Whether inscribed on clay or encoded in streets, whether whispered in myths or carved in stone, memory was the true foundation of the city. To walk in a city today is to participate in this ancient impulse. Every street sign, every library, every archive continues the work begun thousands of years ago. We carry forward the dream of remembering, of anchoring time, of passing knowledge onward, and like those who came before, we choose what to preserve and what to forget. The city reminds us that memory is not only about the past, it is also about the future. What we preserve today will shape what tomorrow knows of us. When archaeologists dig into the heart of the world's oldest ruins, they are not just uncovering stone walls or clay pots. They are excavating memory itself. But memory has layers. It is fragile, easily erased by erosion, repurposing, or even the simple act of forgetting. What if, beneath those layers, the traces of builders who were not human lie hidden, unrecognized, mistaken for natural formations, or dismissed as anomalies too strange to categorize? Consider how even today, many ruins do not look like ruins at all, until someone with patience and a trained eye begins to notice patterns in the landscape. A mound of earth may turn out to be the remnants of a ziggurat. A line of stones, scattered and overgrown, might reveal itself as the foundation of a wall. Even entire cities, like Thought-provoking in Turkey, were invisible for thousands of years until archaeologists carefully peeled back the soil that had disguised them. If human cities can so easily blend back into the earth, how much more hidden might be the remains of something non-human? Perhaps their materials would not resemble ours. Imagine structures built of organic composites that decay into soil, or bioengineered stone that slowly melts into the natural rock cycle. Even with sophisticated tools, the fingerprint of such builders might be nearly impossible to distinguish from nature's own designs. This is where geology complicates the story. Earth is a relentless recycler. Tectonic plates push, fold, and consume. Rivers grind stone into sand. Forests overtake and reclaim open spaces. In this constant churn, the extraordinary becomes ordinary with alarming speed. For archaeologists, even identifying human activity from more than 10,000 years ago is difficult. Beyond that threshold, much of the evidence has already been scattered or erased. And yet, subtle markers sometimes survive. Traces of fire in soil layers, microscopic bits of workstone, pollen analysis revealing sudden changes in vegetation caused by cultivation. These are the clues by which human prehistory is reconstructed. If a non-human civilization had once walked here, would we know to look for their signs? Or would we overlook them because they did not fit into our expectations? Think about how often science has been forced to change its mind when new discoveries contradict old assumptions. Not long ago, the consensus held that agriculture began about 10,000 years ago, and with it, the rise of settled life. Then Göbekli Tepe emerged from the Turkish hills, revealing monumental stone temples that predated agriculture by thousands of years. Suddenly, the timeline had to stretch. Suddenly, the neat sequence farming, then settlements, then religion no longer fit so well. And Göbekli Tepe was built by humans. What if a site just as old, or even older, contained features so alien in form that they resisted any attempt to classify them? Would we call it natural? Would we quietly dismiss it as coincidence, as we often do with geometric rock formations or unusual erosion patterns? Or would we dare to ask if another intelligence once lived here, long before us? This question echoes most loudly when we look at the myths carried through time. Nearly every culture tells of beings who taught the first humans how to farm, how to build, how to write, how to measure the heavens. The Sumerians had their Apkallu, wise figures said to have emerged from the waters to share knowledge. The Dogon people of Mali spoke of visitors from the star Sirius who taught them about agriculture and astronomy. The Greeks imagined gods descending from Olympus, giving the gift of fire and craft. Whether myth or memory, these stories suggest that humanity often thought of civilization as something received rather than invented. But what if these myths do not point outward to the stars, but inward, to a forgotten chapter on Earth itself? What if the teachers were not extraterrestrials, but terrestrial predecessors and intelligence native to this world, whose traces were mostly lost, but whose influence lingers in the cultural memory of our species? The implications ripple outward. If another society existed before ours, one that shaped the early human journey, it would not just alter archaeology. It would change how we understand ourselves. We would no longer be the first to struggle with building cities, to wrestle with technology, to balance the weight of progress against the cost of living within nature. We would be inheritors, perhaps even imitators, of a path already walked, and this realization could lead to something humbling: the awareness that civilizations, no matter how intelligent or advanced, may not endure. Perhaps the builders before us faced their own challenges: environmental shifts, resource exhaustion, internal conflict. The record may not preserve their names, their languages, or their cities, but the silence itself may be their legacy, a reminder that the Earth is larger than any single species' story. To ground this speculation, consider what happens when scientists examine strata of Earth and ice. Within those layers, they find chemical anomalies, unusual isotopes, concentrations of metals, or residues that do not belong. These markers are often taken as signs of volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, or other natural events. But what if some of them represent traces of industry? What if buried within the data, we already have a hints of fires to controlled, alloys to rare, or carbon shifts to abrupt to be explained only by nature? This is not to say the evidence is conclusive, far from it. What is striking, though, is how little it would take for us to misinterpret it. A single assumption here, a preference for simpler explanations there. The line between natural anomaly and artifact is thin, and sometimes it is the patience of interpretation that decides which side the evidence falls upon. At this point, some might ask, if such a civilization existed, why is there not more evidence? The answer may be as simple as time. 100,000 years can bury a city. 1,000,000 years can erase nearly all traces. 10 million years can turn everything into dust or stone. What survives from earlier epochs is fragmentary at best, often limited to fossils of bones or shells, and even those are rare. The preservation of complex structures is far rarer still. For all we know, the Earth has erased and rewritten its surface many times, and each rewriting may have carried away the stories of those who came before. Perhaps what we are left with are whispers, unusual alignments of megaliths, myths that speak of forgotten teachers, artifacts out of place and out of time, like the Antikythera mechanism or the Baghdad battery, which hint that human history may not be as linear as we imagine. Though those artifacts are human, they remind us how quickly complexity can vanish into obscurity, how easily a machine or idea can be buried, rediscovered, and misunderstood. And so we arrive at a strange tension. On one side, the rigorous methods of science, which demand evidence before conclusion. On the other, the vast silence of deep time, which makes evidence scarce and fragile. Between them lies curiosity, the willingness to ask questions even when answers may be impossible. It is in that space of curiosity that this thought experiment lives, not as a claim, but as an invitation to look more closely at the ground beneath us, to wonder about the possibility of forgotten stories hidden in stone, to recognize that absence of proof is not the same as proof of absence. What if the first cities were not our invention, but our inheritance? What if we are, unknowingly, continuing a project begun long ago, by builders whose names we will never know, whose languages we cannot decipher, but whose impulse to create, to gather, to imagine a future resonates still in the rhythm of our own civilization? As we reach the final reflections of this exploration, it is worth stepping back and considering the larger picture. Cities, whether built by humans alone or influenced by forces we may never fully comprehend, are more than collections of stone and mud. They are, at their core, expressions of life's enduring impulse to organize, to create, and to remember. Every alley, every wall, every foundation carries with it echoes of countless generations who imagined a world larger than themselves. The rise of urban centers reshaped not only how people lived, but how they perceived time. In villages or small camps, life was measured by the seasons, by the cycle of planting and harvest, by the rhythm of births and deaths within small kin groups. In cities, time became layered, calendars were invented, rituals scheduled, festivals repeated. The year was divided into months and weeks, hours and moments marked by bells or shadows. People began to live not only for the immediate, but also for the distant, planning, anticipating, and recording. Cities made time tangible, measurable, and communal. With this structured time came structured thought. Laws were codified, standards of measurement established, concepts of justice debated and recorded. Philosophers, priests, and administrators walked the streets, considering not just what had to be done today, but what should be done tomorrow, what should endure for centuries. The city became a crucible of abstraction, where ideas could be tested, refined, and preserved. In this way, it shaped not just behavior, but consciousness itself. Yet even in the grandest city, life remained fragile. A sudden flood, a shifting river, a drought, or conflict could undo decades of planning. The fragility of urban life served as a reminder that even the most enduring structures are temporary. And yet, human imagination persists. Every collapsed wall, every forgotten street, becomes part of a larger continuum. The ruins of the past nourish future generations, feeding ideas, techniques, and cultural memory back into the world. This cycle of creation and decay mirrors patterns found throughout nature. Forests grow and are consumed by fire, only to regrow. Mountains rise and erode, valleys fill and empty. Species evolve, adapt, and sometimes vanish. Cities, in a sense, are another layer of this natural rhythm, created by humans, but subject to the same laws of impermanence. To understand them fully is to recognize that our achievements are transient yet meaningful, fleeting yet resonant. The notion that cities might never have been fully human inventions invites humility. It suggests that our ingenuity is part of a larger, ongoing process that stretches back into time, beyond the limits of recorded history. Perhaps we are not the first to ask questions of permanence, order, and memory. Perhaps earlier intelligences, human or otherwise, pursued similar impulses and left traces that continue to influence us. In contemplating this, the boundary between ourselves and the deep past softens, revealing continuity rather than separation. What does this realization mean for us today? It encourages patience. It encourages attention to the subtle patterns of our environment and the echoes of human and non-human activity that may lie buried beneath our feet. It fosters respect for the transient nature of human achievement and gratitude for the fleeting moments we are able to witness. Most of all, it nurtures curiosity, a quiet, reflective curiosity that can move slowly, noticing connections across generations, species, and the vast expanse of time. Modern cities, in this light, are not only places of commerce and residence, they are laboratories of memory and imagination, ongoing experiments in the same impulses that shaped ancient settlements. When we walk through streets lined with buildings of glass and steel, we are participating in a rhythm that began thousands of years ago. We add our own patterns, our own routines, and in turn, these patterns may echo forward, remembered or forgotten by generations to come. In contemplating the possibility that cities were never exclusively human creations, we also recognize the importance of stewardship. If memory, knowledge, and culture can be so easily lost, then the act of preservation becomes sacred. Archives, libraries, museums, and even the way we maintain urban infrastructure take on a deeper significance. These are more than tools of convenience. They are vessels carrying the collective heartbeat of civilization forward, connecting the ephemeral present to a distant, sometimes unimaginable past. Yet for all the care we might take, the inevitability of change remains. Cities will fall, streets will erode, walls will crumble. Time is both collaborator and adversary. And perhaps this is the ultimate lesson cities teach us. To create is to accept impermanence. To build is to participate in a cycle larger than oneself. To inhabit a city is to dwell within layers of memory, both human and more than human, spanning centuries, millennia, and even the deep rhythms of the earth itself. It is in this awareness that we find a gentle invitation to walk with care, to notice the small details, the curve of a doorway, the worn pattern of a stair, the way light falls across a plaza at evening. Each is a trace of lives lived, of intentions and dreams set into stone and soil. They are reminders that cities are not merely functional constructs, but repositories of experience, consciousness, and aspiration. We can imagine the first inhabitants moving through their streets, as people still move through ours. Children laughing while running past walls now worn smooth. Merchants calling out their goods. Craftspeople shaping clay, metal, and wood. Elders seated in shaded courtyards, recounting stories that will be remembered and repeated. Every act adds a layer to the collective memory, whether it will endure for centuries or vanish by the next season. And if we stretch our thoughts further, we may allow ourselves to wonder about civilizations that predate even the oldest ruins we know. What knowledge, creativity, and memory might have existed, erased by the relentless cycles of time and nature. Even without concrete evidence, the very possibility enriches our understanding of what it means to be human, and perhaps what it means to participate in life's ongoing act of building, preserving, and imagining. In the quiet that follows these reflections, there is space for gratitude. Gratitude for the impulses that brought communities together. Gratitude for the ways in which human creativity has been amplified over generations. Gratitude for the ephemeral nature of accomplishment, which allows each of us to leave our own subtle trace. The cities of the past, present, and future are connected through the same principles: the desire to gather, to remember, to shape the world, and to reflect upon it. Before we close this meditation, take a moment to breathe and let the rhythm of these thoughts settle. Imagine yourself walking through one of the first cities, not as an intruder, but as a participant. Notice the air, the light, the textures beneath your feet. Sense the whispers of countless generations that have moved through these spaces. Each step, each observation, is part of the ongoing story. As we end, remember that the inquiry is not over. Even as the stones crumble and the soil shifts, curiosity remains. And it is in curiosity, gently nurtured, that we continue the dialogue between past and present, between what is known and what may be lost. Cities, after all, are not only about permanence. They are about attention, memory, and participation. To witness them is to participate. To reflect upon them is to honor the unfolding rhythm of life. If this journey through ancient streets and memory has resonated, consider holding on to this reflection in your own life. Notice the traces of human presence around you, the architecture, the patterns, the stories, the rituals. Let them remind you that we are all temporary participants in a vast continuum, that the impulse to build and remember transcends time, and that the first cities were the fully ours, all shared with forces we cannot yet know still speak. Thank you for joining this exploration of the first cities. May your nights be quiet, your dreams expansive, and your curiosity gentle but persistent, following the threads of memory wherever they may lead. Good night.